All right, and let's see. We'll start off with just introducing the project itself. So that way we can frame it and everything. So one thing I'll mention about the project, and I realize I don't have the sheet up, so I'm going to talk while I look for it. Um, is that what's it called? Oh, my computer's getting a little loud. Um, that it's mostly going to focus, if you were to like really say like what parts of the project or parts of this module were important for this project or like necessary for this project, it would be the sections that are talking about hypothesis testing and then maybe a little bit of A/B testing. So I think that ends up being, what's that, section 20 and 21? Is that right? Okay, I see some nods. I think 22 was A/B testing itself, right? So yeah, I would definitely say 20 and 21, and then probably like a touch of like section 19 would probably be the most important parts of to really do this project. 23 and 24, they're important aspects. I think they're really good for you to know, but they're not necessary for this project. Okay. So, all right. So I have a little, sorry, I'm pulling this up. I have a little summary, which I think we had something similar already with, make sure I got this right. Sorry. I know you guys can't see this part, so I'm just kind of pulling it up right now. Okay, we're gonna share it. If there's something different, I'll just mention it. So I just have some advice. I think I shared something similar, like nearly the same thing for the first project. Did I give that to you guys before, like a little advice sheet going through? I see some kind of like, maybe not. Okay, well, here's some advice now, right? So first we should do is just actually look at the project just together. So let's just pull up the actual project, which is module 3, final project. And so I like to pull up the GitHub because it's just easier for me to navigate. Okay, so if you go through this, basically the main thing that you're going to do is that we're going to give you a database. Note that it's a SQLite database. Where are you at? There you are. So it's from the Northwind dataset. It's basically a smaller version of the actual Northwind dataset that's available online. But the main thing is that this right here is our schema, right? Going through, this is our ERD. So note, this is gonna emulate a little bit of like how real life data sometimes happens. There's gonna be less focus on cleaning. You don't have to worry about trying to clean up specific parts, but you should still be aware of doing an exploration to make sure that like what you're about to go investigate is worth, investigating. For example, I'll say that at least one or two of these tables does not have any information in it, even though it's in the schema. I also think the schema might be slightly outdated from the actual values in there. So also be aware of that. So this is also really true in just like the real world where you sometimes will have tables that are just empty or columns and other values that are just outdated or, typoed and everything like that. So just kind of be aware of those aspects. Okay.
What do you
But
mean
basically,
outdated values, Victor?
I mean like outdated like column names. Like so like on here maybe it says region, but then they changed it over to like county. So it might not match with the actual data
Okay.
set or database. Does that make sense? Cool.
So, like, if it used to be county, then there's like a region listed in the county column.
So more like maybe I'll just kind of show you a little bit on here. So sometimes you'll get like schemas like this, or I should say ERDs, where like it'll say like, oh, region right here. But then they
Mm-hmm.
renamed it at some point to county. And so the current data set will actually use the word county and not region. So sometimes this thing might be a little outdated from what the data set actually looks like.
Oh, like the photo of the schema is outdated from. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm. Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah, the data itself, you should, for right now, there's not too much cleaning. You might find some weirdness, to be honest, like that doesn't seem quite right. You can kind of assume most of it is just like truthful. Like, I'll tell you one, for example, a couple of the dates come out, I think, end up being in the future. So don't stress out about that. Being like, oh, like there's some issue, I need to clean this up. Don't stress out about those things. Okay. Because the main focus is going to taking this data and actually doing hypothesis testing. So one thing to note, which needs to be updated, unfortunately, the deliverables. This is going to be true for all of your projects, for the whole course. But you should have your Jupyter Notebook, which is your technical aspect, right? It should always be in GitHub. A README, so make sure to make that README for that Jupyter notebook, or for your repo to say, what you're doing, we'll explain it. A simplest way is essentially exporting your Jupyter notebook as a markdown file and just putting that as your README. That's kind of like bare minimum. But you can talk about like explaining like what your notebook is and stuff like this. And then your blog posts, okay, associated with whatever you're going to be talking, like doing your project on. Like I mentioned before, make sure you kind of have it focused in. We'll talk about some advice on that. And then of course your PowerPoint presentation. So executive summary, you can think of your non-technical piece. Basically it's explaining like your results and saying what are the things like recommendations and actionable things that you should do or your business should do at that point. There's a fifth one, which really should be on here. I'm not sure why it's missing, but it should also be your video. So you still record your presentation like you did last time. And that'll be true for all your projects too, is do a recording of your presentation essentially. And it's a good practice, right? So that way you can kind of practice out, see how long it takes. And if you really wanted to, you can like go through it and kind of watch it through. Though I don't know about you guys, but that would make me cringe a little bit too much if I watched it over and over again. So don't feel like it needs to be perfect on that video. It's just more of a practice for you to have kind of a record of like you presenting it. Okay, cool. Any questions on those deliverables? No, sound pretty good. Cool. All right. And then there's some advice in here, but I am going to go to my general advice right here. And so this is actually on the repo under projects. So just kind of going through it. And I'm guessing you guys haven't seen me share this before, like the first project. Okay, so you can kind of head shake.
I think you might have.
Okay, it might look kind of familiar. So if it seems familiar, I'll just kind of go through it a little bit quickly. They're mostly notes and stuff like I've already said before. One kind of thing is keeping your notebook clean and organized. So I'm going to actually start.
Oh yeah, I do kind of remember this now.
Oh, good. Okay, so I'll just remind you guys. So make sure when you turn in your project, you turn in your project before our one-on-one assessment, right? Which will be not next week, but the week after, right? That includes your blog post, non-technical, your video, right? And what am I missing? Your technical part. Make sure those are all set and ready before the assessment. It makes it easier for us to mark down that you're done, okay? Your notebook, so just make sure it's clean and organized. So using markdown cells to explain what you're doing, put your reasoning, put your thought process down. Really think of it like so someone else can read it and understand why you did the things you did. Use functions, use comments to explain stuff. Try not to repeat yourself. If you find yourself like essentially copying the cell over and over again to basically do the same thing, see if you can convert that into a function to make it a little bit easier and readable and also just easier for you. Let's see here, like document. Yeah, so make sure you document with comments and stuff like this. And these comments should respond to or correspond to your code, saying like, explaining your code, not explaining why you're coding it. Does that make sense, that difference between the two? Is that really your comments are explaining like, oh, like I'm going to, iterate over this part to get these values, whatever, but you're not saying why you're getting those values. So like if you're saying, oh, I got about, like, let's say you do a print and you find it's like, p-value of 0.03. In the comments, you wouldn't say, oh, a 0.03, value means it's significant, at this significance level. You would put that in Markdown instead. Okay, so try to keep like your comments close to the code itself and your commentary on the results and what you're doing in the Markdown, okay? And there might be some blurry lines in there too. There's not a hard and fast rule, but just try to keep that as best you can, okay? What I like to do is I say use pseudocode to basically map out your plan of attack. So I'll write things like this, or it's like, okay, read in data file, drop unneeded columns, ID is improperly read, make it a string. So actually like put the comments on there, maybe even before I write the code. And that way, one is that I can just simply know what I'm gonna do, but then also makes it easier for me to like write the code. And then at the end of the day, once I'm done with the code, my comments are already there. So I don't have to like really do very much. I might add a little extra thing or take parts out, but I think this is really helpful to help keep track of your stuff, okay? But going back to like your notebook in general, keep it a narrative, right? So narratives kind of like are how, honestly, like we people brains or like our human brains are like really good at like understanding information. So have like a flow of some sort. That might not necessarily be the same steps that you took in the real world, like when you're first doing it. But if you can make it so it's at least logically going through, just kind of keep that in mind. And like one way to do this is just periodically, just like, start from the top and read it down and see if it makes sense going through. Okay, cool. Remember the conversation. At the end of the day, the notebook's going to be a conversation with like a data-minded person. So, you can use technical aspects. You don't have to explain like in your notebook, like, oh, a hypothesis test is, and go through those parts. You can assume that they know these parts. Okay. Yeah. So, and just remember, it's more of a conversation. We've already seen one of these, so it's not hopefully too new. Presentation, which is probably the big one. So this presentation in particular, I'm going to say is, I think it's more difficult than most of the other presentations, because trying to convey something like significance, or especially something that's not significant to someone else, especially with visuals, can be really tough, because you don't want to share, like if you were to share like a bar graph of, what's it called? Of like your results. So like, so you say, okay, like let's say, for this project, you're talking about like different discount levels. And for discounts, you say how many orders there are. And you say, oh, at 5%, discount, you sold like 20, right? And at 10% discount, there's like 30, right? It's like, oh, but you find out in your hypothesis test, you find that they're not significantly different from each other. So you say, oh, there's no significant difference. And then you show that bar chart with them actually being different. The problem is that your non-technical stakeholders might say, what do you mean they're not different? Like, they're clearly different from each other. Like, one's bigger than the other. Like, why would you say they're not different? And that can distract basically from your actual results and stuff. So a few things to know is that, one, make sure your visualization, whether it's a bar chart, box plot, line graph, whatever it is that you're sharing, make sure that one matches with what you're saying. So that's kind of an important aspect, that you don't want to show something, but then it kind of conflicts a little bit, like visually at least, with what you're saying. So make sure those match with each other. The other part is making sure they're not too technical. So arguably sometimes I would say box plots in this case might be too technical for some groups. You might be able to do this maybe like with another histogram. You could maybe do a box plot. So if you do have something that's a little technical, you should make sure you really explain what those different aspects are. And if there's ever a visualization, you should show, like if you show a visualization, reference the visualization. Don't just put a graph and then never talk about it. Definitely like actually talk and walk it through. But one type of visualization that doesn't have to do with like our typical bars and stuff like this could be as simple as just saying like we found that 5%, and you can have like a 5% as like the visualization, saying we found these are like the most significant discounts, and people bought a whole bunch of things because there was a 5% discount. That could be something you have. Remember, your visualization is just to emphasize your points. It doesn't necessarily have to be something that looks grand and something that's going to be found like data is beautiful or something like that. So to kind of keep those parts in mind. I think this one's a little tough though, because it's not as super clear exactly what you should visualize and how you visualize it. One thing you can do, so I'm kind of giving some extra advice here for like different plots. If you do plot something out, like, let's say you have like a bar chart right here, right? And you want to focus on a specific aspect, okay? One thing you can do is you can make sure, like, let's say this is the one thing you want to focus on, you can make sure that this is a different color and the rest are exactly the same. Or if you want to say, oh, these parts don't matter, but this one matters, you can gray them out and have the other ones, in bold or, different color. So like you can use that color and visuals to emphasize. You can literally even have like an arrow and just say, oh, look at this one, or a circle or something like that. Like something to help draw in like, hey, this is the important aspect. And this is where I would say is that not everyone will agree with me on this, but I think it's easier to do it this way than like the other way. Is if you have a visualization, keep it, that's the only thing that's on your slide. No extra like bullet points and comments and stuff like this. That way you can ensure that you can talk about just as visualization, you can refer to it, and then you can even have another slide where maybe it has like bullet pointed summaries. Okay, you can do it that way. Or you can have like the bullet point summaries and then your visualization. So I would say keep those separate, because then it makes it easier to go through. When you have a visualization in like a bunch of words, it's just kind of, it dilutes the importance of each one. It not really sure like which one you should focus on. And one thing I would say is, unless there's a very specific reason to it, I would suggest not having more than like one like graph or chart, like visualization on the same page. Again, because it just dilutes the importance of each one. Okay, does that make sense to everyone? Cool. And again, these are like, these aren't like strict rules that you have to follow. I just think they help you build a better presentation. Have I seen presentations that have broken these rules that do really well? Yeah. Have I seen presentations that don't do very well breaking these rules? Yeah, a lot of them. A lot of them will end up putting too much information, which can be a huge danger. So those are kind of like some general points. And I won't go through this whole thing since we talked about it before. I make a little joke, right? Being like amazing presentations, but you can go through these different parts, different bullet points and stuff like this. One last thing I'll mention too that I don't know if I explicitly stay here is that if you have your recommendations in your future work, especially recommendations, we say in the rubric 3 recommendations, right? To have, make each recommendation its own slide. Even if you only spend like 30 seconds on that one slide, it helps like visually signal to that person or like the audience that that is an important aspect. If you put all 3 recommendations together, it just means it doesn't feel as important when they'll look at like the top one or the 2 of them and forget the other one. So if you have multiple recommendations, which you really should try to focus on as like multiple slides. You can, for example, kind of summarize it together and then kind of like really focus on each part. But I'm going to keep emphasizing that part, is that make each recommendation on its own slide. Okay, cool. Any questions on presentation? No, sound good. Cool. All right, and then just make sure, be aware of time, which I think you guys all did pretty well last time. Make sure it's not too long. I don't think anyone's too in danger of making it too short. It really should be like between, like at the very, very, very minimum, 3 minutes. You really should shoot for 5. And like at the high end, 8 minutes, and 10 minutes is like the absolute maximum. Okay, so definitely use the rubric, which is, you guys know how to find the rubric, right? On Learn. Give me a thumbs up if you guys know how to find the rubric. Okay, cool. And you know where to find it too? Okay, cool. I just want to make sure. All right, cool. So make sure you go off that rubric and make sure you get at least that beyond developing, I think, accomplished. And then there's like the X factor. So really just make sure you aim for that accomplished section. Okay, cool. And then the blog, like I said, try to focus on one aspect of the project. You can, if you want to deviate a little bit from that, you can maybe talk about like ANOVA or, you know, like the whatever methods you use. But I would say try to stay as focused as you can, like on one specific part of the project versus like talking about all these different things, just because then it's harder to write about and it just feels more watered down. Okay, cool. And then just includes code snippets and visualizations for your technical part for that blog. All right, everyone. Any questions about this project coming up?
Can we like walk through the actual project a bit and like what it's asking us to do?
Yeah, so you're talking about like for the README right here?
Not the deliverables, like the actual like, oh yeah, the deliverable, sorry.
Okay, so like
this section is under. So like the goal of your project is to query the database, that section.
Okay, let's check that out.
Yeah, down a little below the.
Oh, it's right here, huh? Okay, yeah. So yeah, so I'll kind of summarize. I won't just read it out loud, right? But the main question you have to ask or answer is, does discount amount have a statistical effect on the quantity of a product in order? If so, at what levels of discount? So you have to develop, basically, that's like the main question. Like essentially, it's like the scenario is a business stakeholder, right, comes in and says, hey, we want to know, does discount level matter for the number of products we sell in an order or of that product that we sell, right? So, and then they say, you know, and then what discount do matter? Now, obviously, you might start asking questions like, well, okay, like I can answer this question using hypothesis tests, right? You can probably figure out like what data you would need to do that hypothesis test. But note that this is probably not the whole story, right? So note that they ask for the quantity of the product, right? In an order, but you might reason like, well, maybe it's not about the quantity of the product, how many products we sell. Maybe it's more about like how much we sell. Or maybe it might matter in the sense of, do orders matter in the sense of, what's it called? Like maybe it changes how shopping habits or something like that. So there's other questions you can kind of like ask, which the business stakeholder hasn't explicitly said, but probably likely would like to know, or actually that's what they really want to know, is like how profitable are discounts. So you can kind of extend it out from there. And that's where this is like the like quote unquote one required hypothesis. Basically, it's the one thing that the stakeholder asked explicitly, but then you should come up with at least 3 other hypotheses. And these 3 other hypotheses can stem off of this. I think that's where most people end up doing, is like, oh, well, here's my results for this one hypothesis, this related question. And then they'll develop, okay, now let me see like these other related hypotheses to this question, and they'll explore those ones if they're significant. And then you can go some other parts, okay, like some other aspects that are important that the stakeholder might care about that might not be related to the actual discount. Okay. Does that make sense to everyone?
So as far as like steps to tackle this, like we definitely, I mean, we bring the data in and then maybe a little cleaning and then explore the data and then like just kind of like feed it through, our probably Welsh t-test, because that's the best one to come up to see if it's like statistically significant or not. Does that sound right?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, cool. And do that for like a few different hypotheses that we find.
Yeah, that's going to be more, yeah, that's more or less what's going to be the project itself for each hypothesis is you're going to do some kind of hypothesis test. Now that could be Welsh's t-test, but it also might be an ANOVA test, for example.
Okay.
So, but yeah, essentially you say, what's like, the way I kind of phrase this is like, what is the question? Like not even the hypothesis, but like, what's the question you're trying to answer? And then from that question, your hypothesis, so state your hypothesis. So I expect everyone who like writes their different question is that they have 4 explicitly written out hypotheses. What's your null and what's your alternative? And then underneath that would be, you might visualize it at first, say, okay, like here's a distribution, here's what these look like, and then actually perform the hypothesis test. And as you guys saw, the hypothesis test, coding it out is probably relatively quick. It's going to only be a few lines. So the biggest part really is just like getting up to that point where you do the hypothesis test itself.
Okay. Thank you. That was helpful.
No problem. And one thing it does mention here, which is an important aspect, is one tail or two tail. Make sure you know if it should be a one tail or two tail. And that just depends on the context of what you're looking at. So for example, for discounts, let's just say, right, like if you're looking at as a business person, right, your discount, are you looking to see if you sell more items as a discount, or you're seeing if you're selling less items with a discount? Probably more, right? Like that's the only part that matters. So you won't actually consider, is it less than or greater than? You're just like, oh, do I sell more products with a discount? That's all that really matters. So in that case, you would only be looking at a one tail test. And that's true for whatever hypothesis you're doing, to decide if it's going to be a one tail or two tail. The way I kind of phrase this is one tail is like, it's in a direction, it's either greater than or less than the null hypothesis. And the two tails are saying, is it just different? Like, is there any difference at all? Okay.
And then Victor, when you said like the other day that you thought that this project was easier than the last project, is that because there's like less cleaning involved, do you think?
Yes, I definitely think there's a lot less cleaning, which makes this project a lot more focused. Generally, I think what people end up doing is they end up making this harder for themselves more than like it being a hard project to begin with. So one thing to kind of be aware of is like digging yourself, like going down those different rabbit holes of like, how deep do I have to do to find something that's significant, or, basically breaking these parts away. Don't do that to yourself. One thing I would suggest is try to have like a little game plan of like, okay, these are the hypotheses I want. You can obviously deviate a little bit, but if you do want to explore something beyond like, it's like, okay, I have this hypothesis, maybe it's significant, maybe it's not significant, but you want to dig a little deeper into that part. Definitely kind of map out like logically, what would that look like versus trying to like just dive at everything. because obviously you can go pretty deep into this project, and we only have about a week, right? Like realistically, like if this was something like, you wanted to analyze, this might take, a month or even longer, depending on like, what you're going to be doing with it. So just kind of be realistic in the sense that like, you don't need to know everything, and also know that you likely will get insignificant results, statistically insignificant results, but that does not mean those are not important results. Same thing kind of goes in the sense that if you find significant results, they might not be practically significant. So like, does the effect size actually matter for like what they want to do? So kind of keep those in mind when you're basically doing your results, your technical part, and say, okay, how does this relate to my business, and how are you going to present that in your non-technical part? Okay, cool. Any last questions then? I guess.
Sorry, do you mind just repeating what you just said about the effect size? I was like writing something else
No
down.
problem. Yeah, so the effect size, just being aware of like what the effect size is and if it's important to the business. Like if there's an effect where it's like it's changed, let's say you do something like, oh, how much does discounts really earn people, like earn the business, and that effect is significant, but your effect size is like 5 cents. It's like, well, that's not really that important then. Like we don't need to, change a whole bunch of signs to basically make it so 5% or whatever, or a higher discount just to get 5 extra cents for every dollar or something like that. Or maybe it does. Maybe you're like, oh, it is a reasonable thing. Yes, that's what I mean by effect size. So even if it's significant, you might want to say, is it actually something that's actionable? Same thing happens on the non-significant side. If you find something that's not significant, that might actually be an important result. So for example, now I won't give anything away. You guys can probably figure something out, but okay, cool. All right, awesome. Should I keep going on this guy, or pretty good for the project, or any lingering questions?
I asked all mine, so I'm sure I'll have more later.
Yeah, of course.
Oh, that's something. Since you're away, is there someone we can ask questions to?
Yes, so I'm still kind of working on that. It probably will be Aubrey, because she will be like quote unquote on call. It looks like I still have to talk to her directly, but it looks like Avanit, one of the other instructors, will likely be able to take on at least a couple of the office hours that would normally be scheduled throughout the week. And I think I'm hoping that Aubrey might be able to take a couple of the other office hours. So I think Avanit will probably be available for Wednesday and Friday, and I'm going to see if Aubrey can take Tuesday and Thursday. They might be slightly different times, so I'm trying to work that out a little bit. But at worst, you can always like message. I think likely it'll be Aubrey. You can message Aubrey directly and say, oh, there's a really burning question I need to know. Ask that. And of course, I suggest ask on, your peers, right? You guys can use the cohort channel, but you can also use the channel specifically for, this project, which is, I think, module prob A/B tests. So I think I added you guys all to all the different channels and stuff like that. So you can ask directly on there too, where other students can answer, but also instructors can get to it when they have time to answer any questions. Okay, cool. Yeah, and I'll give you guys more information for sure by Monday, since I'll still be here on Monday. Okay, cool. All right, so, all right, I think that's kind of all we'll go through. Obviously, if you guys have more questions, I'm still around until Monday, so definitely ask those questions, and then there will definitely be people available to ask questions when I'm gone. Yeah, so cool. I guess, I'm gonna stop recording here.